So can I just ask Michelle, can you see my screen share?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent, excellent, good. So welcome everybody. We have quite a few on the call, which is brilliant. So welcome, and we're really excited to talk to you today about our LA6 Community Grants project, which some of you will know we've had funding of this nature before, but we've actually managed to secure further funding to take us to March 2023. And then we've also got some funding we want to talk about at the end, which is for Sunderland area, although you don't have to be necessarily a provider based in Sunderland to apply for it. So we will probably extend the call a little bit longer, just so we can tell you about that additional funding as well. So we will make an official start. For those of you that have just joined late, I'll just recap on the house rules really. So if you can remain on mute unless you need to ask a question. When you're asking a question, it'd be great to see your faces, to put your camera on just so I can put a face to a name. And also we're recording this so we can release it on the website. Okay, we'll make a start. So my name is Mel Crosby. I am a curriculum manager at Learning Skills within Gateshead Council, and I have overall responsibility for the LA6 Community Grants project. My colleague Michelle is here. She's the project officer for the Community Grants. So there may be some questions that I don't know the answer to, so I may well hand it over to Michelle. We also have Wendy Chambers joining us today from Newcastle UXL. She's going to be here to talk about the project that she specifically has run, or the multiple projects she's run, just to give you a bit of insight for those of you that have never run anything like this before, give you a bit of information and insight as to what it's actually like from a third sector perspective. So we'll go straight into the presentation. So LA6 Community Grants is a grant giving project, and it's specifically aimed at the 6 local authority areas in Tyne and Wear. So those of you who remember previous projects in the past, we've also been successful for County Durham. It's a kind of a separate pot because they're still classed as a transitioned local authority area, but that funding has been awarded separately. So when my screen decides to move on to the next slide. So I'll give you an evaluation of the project, an overview of the funding available and the eligibility criteria. We'll talk about some of the important information you need to know and need to be certain of before you go ahead with bidding for the project. Look at some of the evidence and documents we require, some lessons learned from the previous community grants project, and then looking at the application process to get you well on your way. So we have ran LA6 previously many times, but the last project was just under £1 million. We awarded grants to 55 third sector organisations across the 6 local authority areas. Within that, there's also capacity building, which for that particular project we awarded to organisations to do a fast response to COVID and recovery plan as well. So for example, the types of things we funded was moving projects online, buying equipment to enable an organisation to be able to do that delivery online, and lots of things around mental health awareness and staff training and digital skills, etc., etc. So we had about 714 project participants, which was slightly lower than what we'd anticipated. We'd said we were going to get 836 participants, but because of COVID, we didn't quite hit our numbers. That's fine, that happens sometimes. We had an 87% achievement rate and 46% progressed onto a positive progression, which in the case of that project was classed as employment and further training and education. Despite all of the COVID restrictions, of which we had 3 lockdowns, some more significant than others, we actually did a fantastic job. The organisations really pulled together. They shared a lot of best practice, developed a lot of digital delivery, new ways of working, etc. So in terms of funding and eligibility criteria, for this particular project, we've been awarded just over £652,000. It's a bit of an odd amount, to be honest with you. We normally get quite a nice round amount, but 652 is where it's at. And that's for us to allocate to small grants of up to £20,000. And it's in those 6 local authority areas. What we usually do is allocate that funding based on the population size of a particular area. So Sunderland will get slightly different to Newcastle, who get slightly different from Gateshead, etc. What we also do with those figures is we take out economically inactive, so those over the age of retirement, and we take students out as well, because certainly somewhere like Newcastle and Sunderland, student population is actually quite large. So we need to make sure that we've taken that into account. Okay. So if you are classed as a third sector organisation, you are eligible to deliver. So that could be a charity, it could be a not-for-profit, a KIC, whatever that might be. The grants, as I said, are up to £20,000 per organisation per geographic area, and you can apply for a maximum of 3. So if you're an organisation that works across the whole of Tyne and Wear, you might apply for 1 in Gateshead, 1 in Sunderland and 1 in South Tyneside, for example. Just because you're successful in one area, one geographical area, doesn't mean to say you're necessarily going to have the same project be successful in another area. What we have to do is really look at what the priorities are in that geographic area to make sure that it's actually going to be the right project for that area. What you also need to show when you're applying for this project is that you actually understand the geographical area and the service users that you're going to be working with. You need to really be able to justify to us why you're exactly doing that project and not just replicating something. So it's no good just saying, well, this works in South Tyneside, so it's going to work in Gateshead. Well, actually, Gateshead and South Tyneside might have completely different focus, different visions, different needs within them. So it doesn't mean your project can just be lifted up and plonked in another geographical area for it to work. We need to see you've done your research, you understand the labour market, you understand the makeup of the local authority area, and you really can apply that project in a good way. The projects are to support inactive and unemployed participants and move them closer to the labour market. So whilst, which we'll see later, some focus around moving people into employment, the actual ultimate aim isn't to take 10 unemployed participants and get them a job. Great if you can, great if that's who you work with, and great that that's what your expertise is. But it could be about improving their confidence and self-esteem, which enables them to overcome some multiple barriers they've got that actually in the future might enable them to go and get work. It might be improving their digital skills, which in turn can move them forward to enable them to go and do job search and ultimately at the end go and get a job. So it's loosely around moving them closer to the labour market. We can include inactive and unemployed people. So unemployed is fairly straightforward. They are claiming our benefit that is paid to somebody who is out of work. But inactive could be women returners to the workplace. They don't claim any benefits because partners might work. It could be somebody that has previously retired at an early age and now wants to or needs to return to the labour market. They might have retired, say, 55, 56, for example, and now needs to return to the labour market. We also want to capture people that should be claiming benefits that aren't claiming benefits. So they might be not in a particular culture that doesn't want them to claim benefits and they're supported by their community, or they're completely unaware that they're entitled to benefits and they're perhaps supported by parents or siblings or the community as a whole. We've got a really quick start on this project. So the funding was announced 6 weeks late, so everything's on a bit of a back foot. So we've got a really quick turnaround of this, which is why we're doing these webinars really early. So we want bids to be in December, and then we will award ready for January start. You don't necessarily have to start your delivery in January. It's just that you officially have the contract and you've signed that contract, and we know that you're going to run a project. You might choose to have your actual starts in April, May, June, whatever that might be. And then we'll have a round 2 in April. The amount that we distribute across each round 1 and round 2 will really depend on the amount of bids that we get. So we might get all of the money spent in January because we've got loads and loads of projects that really want to bid, and they're of sufficient quality for us to be able to award all that funding. However, we might not, so we might hold some of that funding back and do a re-release in April. We'll then do a similar re-release in August if we have any funding left. However, thinking back to the previous LA6 projects that we've ran, we've very rarely done a round 3. It was only in one time when we got extra funding that we did a round 3. So I would say if you want to run a project, even if your start of participants is going to be later than April, I would suggest that you actually bid for it in rounds 1 or round 2. In previous projects, we've had additional funding added on to the contract towards the end. Because ESF is coming to an end generally, we don't expect that to happen this time. So don't expect that August, September, October of this year we'll get some additional funding. That will not happen. I've also just realised on the presentation that we've got round 1 in January 21, April 21 and August 21. That should all be 22. I think with COVID going, we've all lost the count of what year we're in. Okay, so in terms of funding and criteria, so we have what we call overarching horizontal principles that come from the ESF project that we have to hit. Now, we look at these across the whole of our projects. So when you're bidding, you need to have a mind towards them and you need to think about different groups that you can have participating in your projects. But you don't need to hit these exact ratios at all because that's for us to work out. So you do need unemployed and inactive participants. However, the split of that can be whatever you think is appropriate for your project. We need to have 14% of our participants over 50. To be fair, we've always hit that. It's never a problem. We have a lot of projects that run with 50 plus people. 25% from BME communities, despite that being a very challenging target, given that the average BME population in the northeast is nowhere near 25%. Actually, we do a pretty good job, and I think the last project, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, was 22% for BME.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we do have some projects that very specifically work with BME communities, which obviously raises that percentage. 22% of people with a learning difficulty or a disability, excuse me, and 36% females. We've got 2 additional targets for this particular project, and it kind of reflects where ESF have moved to recently, in that we now for the first time have targets for progression into employment and further education. So we need to get 18% of our participants into employment and 15% into further education. They are realistic targets, we feel. So I don't think for any project that's something for you to be ultimately concerned about, but we will be looking in your bids for specific evidence where you can demonstrate that you're going to move people into employment or further education. And when we say further education, it doesn't have to be, you know, a full-time college course or a degree or anything like that. It could be to raise their confidence levels. They've gone into a pottery course, or it could be that they've gone on to do some more formal employability skills training. And likewise with employment, it doesn't have to be full-time employment. It can be part-time, even if it's just a few hours a week. That still counts as an employment outcome. Okay, so funding and eligibility criteria. We also have capacity building funding within this project. So this is about developing the capacity of your organisation to be able to do something better than you're currently doing. So in the past, we have paid for staff training. So, for example, IAG qualifications, management qualifications. They've also sent staff on bid writing and on marketing programs to really help build the capacity of that organisation. It could be that you go for centre recognition with an awarding body to enable you to offer accredited qualifications within your centre. We've also funded better Wi-Fi connectivity so that participants can come in and actually use workable internet within the centre. As long as it's no more than 30% of the total funding that you've requested, then we're able to fund that capacity building within the realms of it meeting the funding rules. This is the bit that a lot of organisations don't bid for. So we often approach you and go, why haven't you asked for this? Surely there's something within your organisation that you need to do. It doesn't have to be necessarily directly related to this project. It can be much more generic than that. So, you know, please talk to Michelle when you come to put your bid in, or email us. There's an email address you can send your request to, and ask us, what can I spend this money on? I've had this idea. Is this something that's legitimately able to spend the money on? And the only other requirement of that fund is that it must be spent within the project timeframe. Okay, some important information. All participants must be over 16 years of age on the day that you engage with them, and there's no leeway on that at all. They must be unemployed and inactive and actively wanting to work. No matter how far away they are from the labour market, they must be actively wanting to work. They can't already have participated in an ESF funded project. Now, this is quite hard, really. This is probably the most difficult bit of the criteria to reach, because sometimes participants don't know they've been part of an ESF project. So it's about just quizzing them about what they've done previously, and where they've been. And if you're in any doubt, you can just email us and we'll be able to find out from ESF if they have participated in a project in the past. It's easy if they've done something with us, because we'll know. So if they've done a previous LA6 project or LA7 project, we'll know, and we'll pick that up when you send through enrolment forms. But it's also important that you talk to your participants and ask them, and even send us a pre-list through of names and date of births, and we can certainly check if they've been on one of our projects before. Often projects will have a funky name that they've called themselves that doesn't necessarily relate to anything to do with ESF and employability. So it's always great to check. Participants must be resident in the UK and legally eligible to work in the UK, and most importantly, they've got to produce evidence. So yes, they've got to show their national insurance number, but that's not enough. They need to be able to show us a passport or a birth certificate or an indefinite leave to remain document or a residency document or something like that. Again, that's the criteria that can be a bit woolly for some organisations that are not used to collecting that sort of information. So you'll be able to contact Michelle and she'll be able to tell you what evidence is required. They need to complete an initial assessment in maths and English. Now, that initial assessment does not have to be a formal initial assessment. All we ask you to do is to be able to make a sound judgment about what skills they have in English and maths, and where appropriate, support them in developing English and maths skills. So filling out their enrolment form, that can be an assessment of their English skills. Are they able to read what they need to put into that form and put it in legibly? Are they able to read documents that you're giving them to sign? You know, that can be an assessment in itself. When it comes to assessing them in maths, it could be as simple as, well, you know, assessing their financial capabilities. You know, do you keep a budget for yourself? If you're on benefits, do you know how much you get? Are you able to calculate how much you've got left at the end of the week or the end of the month? Do you know how much rent you need to pay? So that can be an assessment of maths. It does not have to be a formal English and maths assessment, and I can't stress that enough. You just need to know whether they've got any barriers to any learning or any activities you're going to be doing with them, and how you do that is whatever's appropriate to you. And then they need to complete an assessment and enrolment form. Michelle simplified it from previous rounds. It looks much better than it used to do. There's still some absolute information we have to collect, so it can look a little bit lengthy, but it's much more user friendly. And we'll be asking for enrolment forms to be submitted right at the start of your project, so we've got plenty of time to iron out any errors or anything that you might have missed on those forms. In terms of the evidence and the documents you need to keep, those of you that have run ESF projects in the past will know that it's not particularly friendly to small organisations, and it can ask you to go wildly above and beyond in terms of paperwork. So what we've done on this project is try and limit that and have only the bare necessities. So you'll have your assessment and enrolment form. You will have whatever informal initial assessments that you've used. So that could be, as I say, just a small written statement on the learner's individual plan to tell us how you've assessed their English and maths and what the outcome was of that. Proof of their national insurance number, proof of UK residency, An individual learning plan, which we supply, really straightforward for them to complete. They then have a timesheet of the activity that they're doing, and a progression form which shows where they've progressed to at the end of the project. Then what you will do as an organisation is every month produce a monitoring risk analysis report for us. There's a pro forma for it. It's really straightforward. What that basically says is, am I on track? Do I have any problems? Do I need some help from Michelle or any of us to support your project? It could be that you haven't managed to recruit the number of participants you wanted. It could be that some have left halfway through and you don't know what to do. It could be that your project, for whatever reason, hasn't really worked and you need to shift your focus to something else. Whatever that is, we basically capture in that monitoring and risk analysis report. You also then do a RAPA review. Anybody that's worked in further education will probably know what RAPA is, but basically it is a way of recording how your participants have progressed through the programme. What have they done that shows you they've achieved? So they might have come to you, spent 6 weeks on a programme and they've got raised confidence. How are you going to evidence that? What are you going to show us that shows that they've actually done that? It could be that they've done a 10-week employability course. Well, how are you going to show they've done that? Is that a certificate? Is it something from the tutor to say they've completed it? So that's what your RAPA review is, the evidence we need to show that they've done what they've done. We then ask for 3 case studies from your project. Where you're doing perhaps really low learner numbers, so you might only be working with 4 or 5 numbers, we wouldn't ask for 3 case studies, we'd probably only ask for 1. But if you're round about 10 learners or more, we'll ask for 3 case studies, and that's picking out 3 examples of what you've done and what the outcomes and the outputs have been. So you've worked with, you know, participant X, their former drug and alcohol they've been offending and they've got very low self-confidence and they've never worked. You've given them a programme that helps with their drug and alcohol abuse. You've raised their confidence. You've given them some employability skills, and now they are doing this, this, and this. So that's what that case study is. What specifically have you done with 3 of your participants that demonstrates some really good work that you've done? And out of all of that evidence, the case studies is what we find most important, because that's what the ESFA like to see when we get to the end of the project, and that forms our end of project evaluation to show all that really good practice that's going on. We then ask for you to do a financial return, which sounds horrific, but actually it's just a very, very simple spreadsheet that shows us what you've spent and what on. We'll give you a guidance on what you can spend your money on, but we try and simplify things really easily. So when you're calculating things like the cost of buildings and costs of overheads that is shared amongst multiple projects, we ask you to just use a simple percentage of that rather than showing us, you know, really in-depth calculations on how, you know, somebody sits in this 5 days a week, but for this project it's only 1 day a week, so we'll split their salary by a 5th. We don't need all of that. It's a really simple calculation. And you tell us most of this when you're bidding for your project. You'll already have an idea of what you're spending your money on. So really, it's just a bit more of a detailed overview of that financial return. We ask for you to send us a photograph that you have an ESF poster displayed at your venue. ESF love to know that you've got a poster up that says this is an ESF project. So we ask you to take a photograph and send that in. Any certificates of achievement you send us, and then you do what we call a self-assessment report. So this is an end of project report that tells us all the brilliant things you've done and the impact of that, but also importantly the things that haven't gone well and why, and lessons that you've learned for any subsequent projects that you will run. And again, along with your case studies, this is really important evidence for us. It helps us compile the final evaluation, and it's because it's quite short, it's really good for ESF to see. They like to see this short report so that they can go away and say, look at the wonderful work that's been done. So we've run this project for a long time. So let me tell you about some of the pitfalls organisations fall into when they're bidding for this funding. When we've run previous projects, we've engaged a lot of participants, we've engaged people that are very far removed from the labour market, but we've also had very good success rates. So you can see in previous projects, we've had success rates of 91%, progression rates of up to 51%. You know, learners, I call them learners, but participants really do move on with their lives as a result of this funding. However, when you're bidding, please don't make it too ambitious. You can apply for a maximum of 20 grand. That's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, especially when some of these students, these participants need a lot of support. So please don't be too ambitious. Don't think you're going to change the world in a 6-month project. That's not going to happen. Projects leave them are too wide sometimes. They get that they're wanting to provide everything to everyone. Again, be really, really specific. Stick with what you're good at, but also go and think about projects that you would like to run that might be a little bit more off the wall. So, you know, when you apply for some funding, you know, you've got to be quite formal and you've got to do, you know, for want of a better word, quite boring stuff. These projects, we want you to have some fun and do things that you've never done before, but within the realms of what you're comfortable with. So what we don't want to see is for £20,000, you're going to engage 50 participants on a project that's going to make sure they all enter employment, even though they've been out of work for 12 years. That's not going to happen. What we want to see for 20 grand is around about 10 participants, and doing something very specific for their needs. So providing them with digital skills that enables them to job search more effectively. Yeah. So really specific projects. What we've also seen in previous bids is there's not enough detail on what you think the impact of your project is going to be. And that's one of the things we look at when we look later at the grading criteria and the marking criteria. Impact's got a big weight in. We want to know, so what? You're going to give digital skills training to 10 participants so they can job search. So what? How else is that going to impact their lives? Are they also going to be able to use the internet for their personal use so they can get better energy deals, better car insurance deals? Are they going to be able to communicate with family and friends that they normally would feel socially isolated from? Are they going to be able to help children with their homework as a result of developing their digital skills? What is the impact of them? Because it's not just about them searching for jobs, it's about those wider issues. Please make sure when you're doing your finance that you're actually calculating it correctly. The amount of times we see people submit at their bid stage the finance form and it's not added up correctly, and it can be out by £2,000 or £3,000. That then means that your bid might be rejected because it's actually over the £20,000 that we're going to provide. So please get somebody to check your finance, and please get somebody to proofread. If you're not the best speller in the world, or you're not great at grammar or explaining yourself, give it to somebody that knows nothing about the project and nothing about what you do, and ask them to proofread it. Because often we'll get submissions and we'll sit there and go, we actually don't know what this project is trying to do. We don't understand what your focus is. So get somebody outside of your organisation to identify all of those errors for you. In terms of the project, so once you're actually up and running, some of the difficulties we've seen people face is that they're trying to enrol learners that are ineligible. So they haven't checked in advance that they're a UK resident, or they haven't checked in advance that they're a previous ESF participant. Please check all of this before you take anybody on, because once you're halfway through a project, if they're ineligible, it's really, really hard to replace them with another student, with another participant. The problem is then that you might actually lose a little bit of funding. So if you haven't met your targets that you set out on the bid, you might then have some money held back because of that. So I'd rather you just check with us at the start, and then we can make sure that you don't have problems later on. Another problem, particularly in the last projects because of COVID, is participants not meeting their numbers. That's whilst, you know, you might do a project for 10 people and one might drop out halfway through, that's not critical. But what is really difficult is if you get halfway through your project and you've still not got all of your participants on board. So don't be over ambitious when you're telling us how many people you're going to work with, but also if you're struggling to meet your participant numbers, come and tell us straight away. Don't just leave it for your monthly report. Don't leave it to the end of the project. Tell us straight away, because we can help. We can either link you with another project that might have extra participants, or we might be able to filter some learners from other programs, or it could be that we can actually just reduce your participant number down and change the focus of your bid, but you still receive the same amount of money. So please don't leave it. Come and tell us. Another difficulty is if your projects solely rely on external agencies for referrals. We still haven't seen a full COVID recovery yet. Job Centre Plus are not up to speed, or the DWP departments are still not up to speed. If you're relying on them to send you referrals for your project idea, please make sure that those referral agencies understand what they need to do for you. Because again, if you find your project is only relying on referrals and you're not getting those referrals to, you're going to put yourself in immediate difficulties because you're not going to recruit. So make sure you've got those referrals really lined up very well and you know that they're going to happen. Often we get incomplete or poorly completed paperwork returns to us. Please make sure when you're sending documents off, so the individual learning plans or the timesheets or the enrolment forms, please double check them for accuracy, because we'll just send them back to you to correct, and that's just a waste of time. Make sure they've got somebody working on the project that knows how to do the paperwork and has a real good attention to detail on that, because it can be really infuriating when you're just getting documents sent back all of the time. We also have some projects that either have an underspend or an overspend. Overspend obviously isn't good from your point of view because you don't want to be spending extra money on a project when you haven't budgeted for it. Underspend isn't good for us because we have to redistribute the money to other organisations if we have an underspend. So please be as accurate as you can in your initial bid, making sure that you've gone through what you're actually going to spend on the project. If you think you're going to underspend, come to us straight away and we can either work with you to reduce your contract down if that's necessary, or what's much better, we work with you on how you can actually spend your allocated money. Yeah, so it could be moving some over to capacity building if you haven't spent your 30% capacity building. It could be you've got a hidden cost that you're not aware of that we can help identify for you. A number of projects run into difficulties when the person responsible for the project moved on and they didn't tell anybody what the project was about, and they didn't know how to run it, and they didn't know what the focus was, and they didn't understand the paperwork. Please make sure in your organisation you've got more than one person that knows all about that. Yeah, definitely need to have 2 people that get the paperwork, they get how to do the returns, they know who the contacts are, they know who Michelle is, who I am, and they know where to send all the information to. And then you also need to make sure that there's enough time allocated to tutors and delivery staff to fulfil the paperwork requirements. So please make sure that when you're costing your staff time, it's not just about the amount of time that they stand there in front of somebody and teach them something. It's got to also be about doing that administration. And if you handed that over to somebody else in your organisation that's better to do that, then make sure you're allocating their time to the project. So at this point, I am going to hand over to Wendy. So Wendy has run a number of successful projects for us as part of Newcastle UXL. Wendy, do you have a presentation that you need to share?
No, I don't, Mel. It's just me.
Okay. Well, I am going to stop sharing for the time being, and then we will see. Should see your face.
Brilliant. Okay. So can you see me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Wendy. I work for an organisation called Newcastle UXL, as Mel's already said. We're really pleased to have the opportunity to give you an idea of how we've delivered the Community Grants project, and just to let you know what we've found works well. So a little bit of background of previous Community Grants projects we've delivered. We've worked as a subcontracted delivery partner for many years now with Gated Learning Skills, and most recently on the previous rounds of the Community Grants projects in Newcastle, North Tyneside and Gateshead. We've always found Gateshead Learning Skills extremely supportive, and we've always felt listened to. So, for example, if we put forward a request for, or a suggestion, for example, of capacity building, we've always felt that that's been listened to. and they've taken on board why we want it, and they've been very positive about our suggestions. Couple of examples of what we've used capacity building for: staff development. We've had 2 staff who have completed the level 6 CIAG diplomas, and we've got 2 who are almost finished the level 4 IAG. And obviously that's a massive benefit to us, and it means that we can provide an even better service when we're delivering information, advice and guidance. We've had a new website and market materials to promote the services. This has really supported us to increase our referrals for future rounds and other projects that we deliver. Matrix accreditation, that was another one that we've used capacity building to pay for. We've had new laptops and new printers. Again, this has helped us to improve our delivery, both face-to-face and also to improve our remote delivery. Funding for learners, we've used this to provide devices where the lack of digital technology has been a real barrier to accessing learning opportunities. We've purchased gift cards, so we've got them readily available. So, for example, when we have a learner who needs things such as interview clothes or other kit for training courses or employment, we've got those readily available and we can give them one of those. Also, as an incentive for those learners who've completed the course and achieved their goals, we've given them to those participants. Gift cards were purchased for learners who progressed into employment or college courses for Gregs. So, for example, if they were on a really low income, it meant that they could buy their lunch, and for others would fund a shop for them to make their own packed lunches. And this, for some young people, has been a really big barrier. The thought of going to college might really inspire them, but they could be really worried about those little things, such as, well, I've got no money to go to get any lunch. So that we found that really helped. Other purchases could be for travel, and for example, where a learner progressed, this could be a travel pass for the first couple of weeks or up to a month, depending on obviously where they're travelling to. An example of effective activity with community grants programmes. On the last round, we worked with a group of learners who were living in supported accommodation. That was a project in Gateshead. It was during the lockdown, and we found that mental health was raised as a real barrier to learning and moving forward into progression opportunities. So to build positive relationships, we worked with the learners to develop a really healthy eating plan where they could plan a menu, do the shop for the activity, cook the meal, and then they all sat down together to eat it. One of these projects was completed over the Easter bank holiday weekend and included a number of other activities that we funded through community grants. The whole group told us that they enjoyed working together, they felt better for eating fresh food and healthy meals, and they felt that they would continue to cook fresh food and try new recipes. Over the weekend, they took photographs and they made videos, which they shared with us to show how they'd all worked together. We took it a step further and we worked with a local young people's organisation. Now, they were looking to work with a group of young people to promote health and well-being through healthy eating, fitness sessions, mindfulness activities and personal care. They were able to support the group and provide fitness resources. And some of these included things like yoga mats, stability balls and yoga bands, footballs, personal care packs. These included things like shower gels, shampoo, deodorants and things. They also provided healthy eating packs with the ingredients to cook a range of healthy meals, and some mindfulness activities support their mental well-being. So we worked with them to identify what these learners were telling us would support them, and we worked with the staff at the Supported Housing Project who organised activities with the resources that were being given. Some of this was in a local park and community spaces, and they organised things like football matches, outdoor yoga. So while the group's mental health and self-esteem and motivation was really improving, we were able to work with them to identify some other progression opportunities for further learning, volunteering and employment. And we found that working alongside other organisations to give a really full service really supported them. So I'd say things to be mindful for. Be realistic, as Mel said, with the number of learners, your profile, and make sure you take into account early leavers and withdrawals. If you do over-recruit by a couple, then you can put a contingency in and you'll still meet your profile if you do get those dropouts. Also, again, exactly as Mel said, put aside time for compliance checks throughout the project so that if you've got any issues, you can identify them and you can raise them with Michelle, your contract manager. If you have got any concerns and you do raise them with Michelle, we've always found she'll work with you to resolve them. The team support you and they've always got a solution focus. And I'm sure you'll find them really supportive as well. Never felt judged, never been judgmental, just really want to look for a solution. So it's a very brief overview of some of the things that we found have worked and some of the ways that you can use the funding to support some of those really furthest from the labour market, and also to develop your business through the opportunity for capacity building. You know, we've worked with Michelle and Mel for many years on many different projects. We've found that community grants has really supported learners, but it's really helped us to build our business as well through capacity building, and also to give us the experience to put all of that data into future bids. So, you know, good luck, put your bid in, be really creative, and hopefully we'll see you at some of the partnership meetings.
Fabulous, Wendy. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure if anybody's got any further questions for Wendy, she'll be more than happy to answer them at the end as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mel.
Fabulous. So I'm just going to reshare my screen. Except now I can't see anybody else. Give us one moment. There we go. Okay. So let's look at the application process. I'm just going to reiterate again to check and double check that you meet the criteria for the projects. Please make sure you're looking at the criteria, the marking criteria. It's all available on the website to be able to make sure you're putting enough information in to each of the questions. So we will first of all score an application. We will then, if it is successful, look at what the need is for that project in that local authority area. And we have a number of people in each local authority area, for example, community organisations, local authorities, economic development teams, who will help us judge whether your provision is needed in that area. We will also look at all other bids that have been submitted and successful for that area to make sure there's no conflicts there. So what we don't want is 6 projects in Sunderland that all work with BME women to raise confidence. There's no need for that. What we'll do is make sure there's a good spread of different projects across each local authority area. We'll also check that you're not currently in receipt of ESFA and DWP funding. Now, it doesn't matter if you are, but what we're trying to do is work with small organisations that don't normally get access to ESFA and DWP funding. So you can still be a successful project and still get this funding. It just depends what else in the area. If we see that there is another project that wants to do the same or similar to you and they don't get DWP or ESFA funding, it's more likely that we award it to that smaller organisation. We also have a requirement to have a fair distribution across the 6 local authorities. So as I said right at the start, we will be looking at population within each local authority area, taking out the students, taking out economically inactive retired people, not all economically inactive, and then looking at the which of those are unemployed. Then we will be looking at performance and delivery of any previous projects that you've run. So there's a space on there to talk about what you've done in the past, how much funding you've had, whether you've hit your targets. We'll also look at any previous projects you've run for us. So if you've run with us before, you've not been successful, we'll look at the reasons why, and that will affect our decision to award a grant to you. It won't discount you completely because sometimes there's very genuine reasons why you haven't been able to achieve a project, but it will influence our decision on that. And then the questions that we ask, again, this is still all available on the website already. So we'll do a suitability assessment, which is basically, are you a third sector organisation? Do you have a representative for safeguarding health and safety, equality and diversity? Those sort of tick box sort of things to make sure your organisation is actually eligible. We will award 15 marks for your overview of the programme, so that's quite chunky, making sure that you actually are telling us what your project is about. 10 marks for your finance, so you need to be really quite accurate on how you're predicting your financial spend. Track record and impact is in 2 parts. So if you have ran projects like this before, we'll want you to put in what your track record and impact was. If you haven't ran a project like this before, we'll be asking you to put in what you believe the impact to be. Okay. 20 marks for project management, so that's making sure that you've got all the resources and the staffing to run this project, that you understand that you need to submit reports and you need to do the paperwork. 15 marks against your profile, so this is when you're telling us what learners you're working with and who they're going to be. So how many of your participants will be women, how many will be have a disability, etc. 10 marks for quality. Where you need to tell us all about how you're going to monitor the quality of that project, so that also links in with your project management. 10 scores for your staffing, so we can make sure you actually have assigned the right capacity. 5 marks where you need to explain about equality and diversity and inclusion, health and safety, and safeguard and prevent, and really your approach as an organisation to those 3 themes. 5 marks for financial sustainability, which shows us exactly what money you've got really, and how you can make sure that you've got enough funding from other pockets of money to really sustain the other bits of this project. So for example, you've got 1 member of staff that you currently employ and they're funded by 5 different pots of money, and ours would then be a 6th pot of money. How does that look? What does that really look like? And then final capacity building, so this isn't including your overall marks. It's still scored because we have to obviously make a judgment about whether you've put the right bid in for the right things, but it's not included in the other marks, and that is what do you need your capacity building funding for. So it is perfectly able to pass on your bid and be awarded a bid, but for whatever reason you might not be awarded your capacity building because it doesn't meet the criteria, or we ask you to revise your capacity building. However, you won't get it the other way around. You can't just get capacity building, you have to have a project. Deadlines, really tight. We only got awarded the bid, I can't even remember, was it the 30th of October, something like that. They like to keep you hanging on a bit. So obviously we started market engagement. Our webinars are this week. Our application window opens on Monday, but you can download the application documents now and start looking at them and start putting those together. There's a hard deadline of close of play Friday the 10th of December, so that's midnight Friday the 10th of December. No applications will be accepted after that until the next round is released, if the next round is released. We will notify you by the 16th of December whether you've been successful or not, and then we will meet you very early January to have an initial contract meeting and sign the grant agreement with a view to your project commencing. As I said before, we do not expect you to suddenly have participants doing your project on the 3rd of January. That's not feasible. You can put a bid in and have your starts in May, June, July, whatever that's going to look like. We will still sign that grant agreement, and it's so we know what your timescales are. And then finally, there's our contact details. So you can contact us at any time. We have the LA6 Community Grants application email address. That's monitored by all of us, so that's often the best way to get in touch. However, there might be something more specific that you need to contact us on. So Michelle is normally your go-to person. She knows the ins and outs of the project. She can link you with other successful projects if you want to know a bit more information. She can talk you through the paperwork and all those sorts of things. Judith is our administrator, so she's brilliant at anything to do with, is this learner eligible, or have they been enrolled before? She makes sure all the finance and the data all links together and you get paid the right amount of money. And I just come and do these presentations, take a bit of the glory, show the senior managers how good we are, and then let Michelle do all the hard work. So you can contact me by all means, that's absolutely fine. But if you want any work doing, go to Michelle. Okay, so I do have Sunderland to talk about, but what I want to do first is answer any questions that anybody has about anything you've seen or heard so far this morning to do with the community grants. So over to you. If you could just raise your hand in the normal in the chat, that would be great. Okay, so either I've done a fantastic. Oh, yes, we have one. So, Lindsay Usher.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, it was just to see, so if we've run projects in the past that have been sort of successful, can they have a similar theme as last time, or have they got to be completely different?
They can have a similar theme, yes. They can even be exactly the same, but what we need to show is that you've learned from previous projects and you're applying good practice that you've learned into this new project, and it must be new participants.
Lovely, thank you.
Anyone else got any questions? Emily?
Hi.
Hi.
I just have a question about participants that have been on other ESF programs. So, for example, CLLD, could they be then enrolled in this kind of project?
Technically, yes, as long as that project is deemed different from what we're running. Yeah,
Sure.
It's hard because there's so many ESF funded projects that have lots of different names that, and if I'm absolutely honest with you, if the project's not with us, we don't really have much of a way of checking if they've participated in one before, and ESF don't necessarily run those checks. So I would say as long as you can justify that they've done a project with you that was ESF funded, but this is the next step for them, then
Yeah.
that's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Lindsay, is that an old hand or have you got another question?
Sorry, it was just the same last time.
That's fine. Any questions from anywhere else?
How you take your hand down?
You click on it again, Lindsay, to take your hand down.
Thanks.
Okay, so no more questions at this time then. If you suddenly think of something, stay at the end of the call. I'll hang on for a few minutes to answer anything. What I now want to move on to is another grant giving project that we only had notification of on Thursday, I think it was. It's Community Renewal Fund. We've been waiting for this funding for an enormous amount of time. It was supposed to be confirmed in June, but actually we only had confirmation on Thursday. So we've been waiting quite a significant amount of time for it. So it's Community Renewal Funding. It's only available to participants in Sunderland. You don't have to be a Sunderland-based organisation, but anything you do must be with Sunderland participants, and you must run it in Sunderland. So you'll need to find a location in Sunderland if you don't have one already. So this is an introduction to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It's funded by central government, but it's administered by the local authority. Each of the local authorities had up to £3 million worth of projects to approve, and ours is a community renewal grants funding, so it's very similar to community grants but in a lot more detail. So it is grants from 10,000 up to 45,000. It goes directly to a third sector organisation, and we have up to 18 grants available. And it moves on from the community grants in that we are now looking for an organisation who can coordinate multiple professionals to provide one-to-one holistic wraparound support to address multiple and complex barriers to employment. So, for example, you might have an individual who hasn't worked for 30 years, they have very low self-esteem, they have been previously homeless, they are unable to move forward with their lives, they have no digital skills, very few qualifications, mental health needs, their home needs, you know, their cooker's broken down. You know, there's so many different factors, and I think all of you will probably see people like this regularly. There's so many factors in their life that they just don't know where to go. This wraparound support will be, for example, sourcing private help for their mental health. So that could be private counselling sessions. It could be helping them with short-term debt. So they're in debt with the gas, which means that they go onto a meter, which means they pay more for their gas. So you would clear that gas bill for them, and that would mean that they can then go on to pay monthly again, so they get better financial control. It could be that they have no digital skills at all. They don't even own a mobile phone. You might buy them a mobile phone and set them on their way and give them training and support on how to use that, which will enable them to keep in contact with people, improve their mental health, but also at some point in the future, do things like go on the internet, get better deals for their home insurance, or, you know, be able to search for jobs. You know, it's more of a long-term thing. You might source some training for them. So it could be literacy and numeracy training, either formal or informal. It could be a college course. It could be that you provide an incentive to an employer to provide a work placement for them. It may even be that there's been a breakdown in communication with their family, so you pay for mentoring or support for the whole family to enable them to move forward. It really is every single aspect of their life that you are trying to sort for that individual. So for 45,000, we'd expect you to work with no more than 8 people. Yeah, so that's your kind of ratios that you're looking at. When we're talking about £10,000, I would say about 2, maybe 3 people you're working with. So what we want is the people that are furthest away from engaging. In terms of targets, it's about moving people forward. There are some targets in there of moving people to make them more employable. It doesn't mean they have to get a job. They've just got to be more employable. It's about them engaging with services and engaging with the benefits system. So people that perhaps aren't accessing the benefits system for whatever reason, move them into that position where they're able to do that, and they're able to get a foot on the ladder, and they're able to get back in control of their lives. Now, you as an organisation don't have to provide all of that support, but you have to be able to source it. So you might be able to provide one bit. So you might be a mental health charity and you can do all the stuff around their mental health and fund all of that out of the project. Great. But you don't know anything about education, and you don't know anything about, you know, paying off the bills or anything like that. So you engage another organisation to do this. So what we are looking for in those bids will be information about who you're going to work with or who you're working with and what support they need and who else you need to bring in to support them with those needs. What we don't anticipate you doing is bidding for money and not know who your customers are going to be. You should already know who these people are when you bid for this money. You already engage with these individuals and you've already identified that they need this level of support, this wraparound support for them. So whilst I say you don't have to be based in Sunderland, you're going to have to be already working in Sunderland. You're already going to know that you've got people in Sunderland that you work with to be able to bid for this money. Yeah. So what we don't want to see in bids is I will engage 5 individuals and we'll do X, Y, and Z. No, what we want to see is I'm already engaging with Joe Blogs. This is what they need, and this is who I need to work with to enable them to move on with their lives. So it's all the clients you've got that you wish you could help, but you couldn't because you didn't have the money. That's what this money is for. Okay. So because we've only just heard about this funding, we don't have any details. I've got a meeting later on this afternoon for us to find out more of those details about how the application process works, what financial records we'll need to keep, etc., etc. We're envisaging it being very similar to the community grants. We're not expecting it to be a real heavy hand in terms of paperwork and in terms of recording lots of things, but what we know they're definitely going to want to hear is all these good news stories. So when I talked about community grants and having those case studies, what we're going to want is case studies on each individual. So if you've got 8 people, we're going to want 8 case studies on what very specifically you've done for that individual and how that's helped them move on with their lives. Okay. We will have a separate website for this. We don't yet, but we will. It'll look very similar to community grants. We'll release that to any interested parties. If you are interested, I would say email either Michelle or I can go back so you can see the email addresses again. But obviously this has been recorded, so you'll be able to watch it. It'll be up on the website. So you'll be able to email Michelle and I your interest initially, and then when it comes to us releasing the application forms, we can make sure those get out to you. It's a very short project. We initially had 9 months. They've now shortened that to 8 months. So it's been released now, and we have to have everything wrapped up by June. So we're not looking for long-term interventions. We're looking for short stuff that's going to get those people moving some way forward with their lives. Okay, so it is going to be a challenge. I would say if you're very new to this sort of stuff, it might not be the right way to go. I would ease yourself in with community grants first. However, what I would also say is if you're experiencing doing this, it might not be ESF funding, but you're experiencing providing wraparound support to people, this might be a really good prerequisite to an ESF community grants project. So it could be that you put a bid in for Sunderland and you put a bid in for community grants at the same time, but your community grants doesn't start until June, and it can be a follow-on, a progression for them to move into that. Okay. Any questions about the Sunderland funding? I'll do my best to answer. I think I've stunned everybody to silence this morning. Okay, so that's everything from us. Nobody's got any questions, so we'll end the meeting here. Please do come back to us. Please do visit the website. We'll have this uploaded in the next hour, so you can rerun the webinar if you need to. Great to see you all, and really looking forward to getting your applications.